Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I have 4 Reddit stories for you guys. If I pronounce anything wrong, I do apologize. All credit goes to the original posters of these stories, and I will link them in the description. Sometimes demons kill you a minute at a time. Around the time I turned 30, I first became aware that I was possessed. Unlike in the movies, I wasn't shouting obscenities at priests and spinning my head in circles. I wasn't even possessed for most of my day. Instead, I would just sort of disappear for a few minutes at a time, sometimes an hour, and when I came back, I'd find very little changed. Maybe I'd even driven to work or made pasta, but it hadn't been me doing it. I'm not sure how I invited the demons in. Maybe they'd been there all along, growing slowly, but it's easy to ignore a missing second, even a missing minute. Through my teens and 20s, the demons of time were probably there all along, eating my life a nibble at a time. Now it was disappearing in great big chunks. The problem was worst at work. I'd start working on a PowerPoint for my boss about some little company we were trying to buy, and then bam, I'd wake up on the BART ride home, listening to some podcast. The work would be done, maybe even done well, but it hadn't been me doing it. I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal, like maybe it's actually a benefit to have someone else do your work or cook your dinner, but I had to admit I was getting a little on edge. Sometimes I'd wake up at night drenched in sweat, a deep pit of fear in my gut. Sure, I had died already, or was about to any instant. I'd wonder if I'd been dreaming or sleepwalking or what, and then I'd spend an hour Googling rare sleep disorders and brain tumors and feeling around my skull for lumps. Stuff I'd actually used to care about were starting to go missing too. Like when I watched football, I'd find myself looking up to find a whole quarter had passed and my beer had disappeared without me enjoying even a sip. Then in February, I went to a Super Bowl party. Honestly, it was usually my favorite time of year. I guess I'd started to drift apart from friends a little, and it was the one time I really carved out to see everyone. But this year, the whole party passed in an instant. As I walked out the door, I realized I didn't remember a single conversation, or a thing I'd eaten, or the final score. There's a woman downtown who helps with these kinds of problems. I visited her in the antique bookstore where she works. She had me sit in an old chair and then poured a circle of salt around me, all the while clicking her tongue like a clock. Then suddenly I blinked and it was dark outside the window. "What happened?" I asked. "I spoke with your demons of time," she informed me. "I asked them to leave, but they refused. There are several infesting you, but I spoke mostly with their leader. He was quite insistent on staying." "Can you make them leave?" I asked, getting slightly annoyed. "I didn't pay you $1,000 just to have a conversation with them." She shook her head. "A demon of time isn't quite like your possessive entities. They are not malicious, more like curious scavengers. They want to experience life in our world and to get away from their suffering. We're actually all born with a few inhabiting us. They only get out of hand if you're deeply disengaged with your life. Then they start taking up larger and larger chunks of your time. It's kind of a vicious circle." "Look," I said, "what's it going to cost to get rid of them? Another couple of grand? I've got the money." She shook her head. "You're not listening. You've actually got to care about your life, or this only gets worse. You blink and a day has gone by, then it's a few days, then it's a year. You wake up on your deathbed and realize the demon lived your life, and all because you didn't care enough to fight back." "I care," I said. "I promise." "But do you care enough to do the little things to make them go away?" she asked. "Some are basic. Take a walk through the city and look at the edifices of the buildings. Leave your phone on a charger and don't check it. Leave the TV off for a few days and do something you've never done before. Call an old friend. Are you willing to fight like that? I went home and thought about what the woman said. Mostly I thought about how she cost me $1,000. I tried to take her advice. I threw on a coat and headed toward Golden Gate Park. I tried to notice the cracks in the sidewalk and the little plants sprouting there, and the smudges of gray fog overhead, but honestly, trying to pay that level of attention for more than a few minutes was exhausting. It was a shitty day out, too, with rain coming down sideways, and after a couple of minutes I was soaked. I ended up heading home and ordering some takeout. As I turned on the TV, I felt my soul slightly fading like a light on a dimmer. Something was coming to the forefront, eager to watch whatever was on. Or how could anything be so excited to watch Netflix? I could tell it was starving for any morsel I'd throw it, even just a few hours of watching TV. Because of the demon, every moment was time away from hell. If it wasn't there, it would be burning in a pit of sulfur. Every boring minute in our world was heaven in comparison. And how was I supposed to care enough to compete with that? Suddenly, the real terror of the situation hit me, because I knew I didn't care enough to fight it. I wasn't going to take long walks and watch sunsets. I was going to keep on sleepwalking through life, just like I always had. Somewhere in the dark, I was shaking, acutely aware of my own weakness, and I could see the future stretching out in front of me, a handful of boring decades, mostly lived by something else. I was screaming at myself, furious and terrified, and the thing was watching Friends, laughing its head off at every bad joke, laughing like I had never had in my life, and I knew in that moment that I was going to let it win. After dinner walk. This happened back in the 80s, so very much the pre-cell phone era. I was in high school at the time. One night after dinner, my mom suggested we take a walk around the block to walk off dinner. My brother and dad were watching TV and opted to stay home, so it was just us girls. We lived out in the fringes of the suburbs in a subdivision that was semi-rural. By what I mean, there were houses but no streetlights or sidewalks. Everyone had septic tanks, as there was no sewer service, etc. The houses were all well back from the road, and the lots were wooded. Anyway, we're walking around the block, which is about 1.5 miles total, and we're almost back home. It's pitch black that night, no moon, and we had a flashlight to use as needed. Without it, you couldn't see much past a foot or two around you. We mainly used it as a signal if a car went by, but there wasn't really anyone around, so we had it switched off and were walking and chatting. Just as we turned the corner onto our street, we suddenly heard footsteps behind us. This was a bit weird as we had just come from that way and hadn't seen or heard anyone walking on the street or coming down the driveways we passed. But we just figured it was some neighbor also out for a walk, and we hadn't noticed them in the dark. So I turned around to look and switched the flashlight on to see who it was. They immediately switched a flashlight on too, so I could only see their light and not them. They said nothing. We kept walking, but the footsteps behind us sped up now, and they sounded heavy, so we thought it was a man. We sped up, he sped up. I turned the flashlight back and he turned his on again, in silence. We were too scared to call out, and now we were approaching our driveway. As we got there, I pushed my mom in front and told her to get up the driveway, which was steep and long. Once she had to start, I sprinted up after her. As I did, the footsteps veered away to the other side of the road and kept going. Nothing was ever said by this person, and normally people here waved and spoke when out walking or even driving by. When we got up to the house, my dad said it was probably just a neighbor. So my brother and I got in my car and drove down the road to see who it was. No one was there. We went around the roads and no one was walking on them. There wasn't time for him to leave the area. Either it was a nasty neighbor getting off on scaring us and then ducking into a house, or whoever it was came out of the woods behind us and then disappeared back into them. I got a mail order husband. I was on my third glass of wine on a lonely Friday night when I ordered him. The website seemed fairly innocent. It gave off an old-timey matchmaker vibe, when blind dates were coordinated by people rather than algorithms. We'll find the perfect man for you. Sign up today to find him. I did, and was more than a bit surprised when a 6-foot-long box showed up on my doorstep the next morning. Open immediately, read the warning written on the side in big red letters, and there were holes in the cardboard, several of them. Near the top of the box, are those air holes? My dog Ruby slunk out of the house behind me. She began sniffing the box like mad, as if there were something very interesting inside. No, there's no way. I ripped open the box with a pounding heart, and burst out laughing. At the bottom of the box was one of those stupid grow a boyfriend gay gifts. You know the ones. You put a little plastic man in water, and it grows to several times its size. I'd seen them at my local CVS for Valentine's Day. I'd been pranked. I picked up the thing. It was a little man about 6 inches tall, with impressive biceps and pecs, made of spongy plastic material, all one color, a medium pink beige. Even his eyes were that color, which was a little creepy. Well, aren't you handsome? I put him next to my computer. The fact that I'd drunk bought a plastic boyfriend was actually pretty funny when you really thought about it, and a little sad. I immediately texted my mom and told her I'd meet her friend's son she kept raving about. That evening, I ate a steak dinner for one as I continued to work on my proposal, and there sat the plastic, fleshy little man watching me with his fleshy little eyes. What are you staring at? It stared back with those soulless beige eyes. Yeah, kinda lame that I'm sitting here alone on a Saturday night, huh? I sighed and glanced over at Ruby. Look at me, talking to an inanimate object. I've gone batshit crazy, huh? She didn't look up from her chew toy. Out of sheer boredom, I went into the kitchen and filled a bowl of water, took him out of the package and plopped him in. But even after a half hour had passed, he only grew about an inch taller. Guess you're a shower, not a grower, I said with a snort. But that night, before I went to bed, I forgot to pour out the water. I woke up with a start at 4 a.m. It only took me a few seconds to realize what woke me up. There were strange sounds coming from downstairs, a sloshing sound and then a loud thump. I bolted up in bed. Someone's in the house. I'd always had a fear of something like this happening. Masked men breaking into the house in the middle of the night, killing me in my sleep. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and clutched it to my chest, straining my ears to listen. Thump. Oh God, he was coming up the stairs. I threw off the blankets and ran into the closet, closed the doors and held my breath, watching through the slats as I silently dialed 911. The door opened. A man stepped inside, but there was something off about his movements, jerky, clumsy, like he didn't quite know how to walk. I held the phone to my ear, whispering my address into the speaker. His head swiveled towards the door, and every muscle in my body froze. His eyes, they were the awful beige color, like they were made of skin. As I stared at him, I realized his hair too, everything. He was beige all over, from his head down to his toes. A man made entirely of plasticky flesh. I stifled a scream, held the phone to my ear, praying he wouldn't come look in the closet. He stood in the middle of the room, his gaze sweeping over each wall. He paused when his eyes fell on the closet. Slowly he turned in my direction, and then he took a step forward. I held my breath as he took another step, and another. No, 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 no. And then he was there, right outside the doors. He paused and leaned forward. Through the slats, I saw him looking at me with those terrible, flesh-covered eyes. Thin veins spider-webbed across the skin, across where his pupils should be. But somehow he could see me. I could feel it, feel him staring, waiting. A siren wailed in the distance. He turned around and slipped out of the door. Thump, thump, thump. I heard his footsteps recede down the stairs, and then he was gone. The police found no trace of the man I'd seen. I told them about my order and showed them the email confirmation, but when I tried to click on the website, it gave me an error message. Whoever had sold me that thing had completely vanished. A few days went by and I thought that was the end of it. I'd even convinced myself that it had been some sort of waking nightmare, and what I'd seen never even happened. But then I got another package. This one didn't have an address on it. Whoever dropped it off on my porch had hand-delivered it, and it was small, only about 6 inches long. With shaking hands, I reached down and picked it up. The smell hit me like a truck as I brought it up to my face. Slowly, I lifted the lid and peered inside. It was a heart. It looked like it had been torn out of a small animal. Dark liquid pooled at the corners of the container, and I fought the urge to vomit. Only then did I notice the trail of large footprints in the snow leading away from my porch. I think he's going to keep coming back. I think he likes me. Creepy car in the dark. I walked to work at about 6:30 in the morning, so it has been dark at the time for a while now. I'm used to it, though one time I also got spooked by, I think, a badger running across my path. Small country roads. Relevant later. I was unemployed for many months before this job, so it was especially important to me I get there on time. On one of these mornings a while ago, a car pulled up a little in front of me by a house and turned on their interior lights. This is pretty normal too. People pick people up for work or drop off packages. I still give the cars I walk past a bit of wide berth, and all was fine this time. When I had walked a little past the car, it began to drive again and pulled up in front of me again. This time not in front of a house and turning off all the lights, including headlights. It was dark, and I had already got used to the lights when I walked past this car before, meaning my eyes weren't adjusted to the dark anymore and I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything from inside the car, no one talking. I didn't want to walk past, but I sped up a little to walk past anyway because I was beyond tired and just didn't feel like crossing the road when I couldn't check if I was running late or not, since I didn't want to be distracted by my phone. I decided to just get a good grip on my metal water bottle as I went, and I sped down a side road with houses. It is part of my route. I was absolutely not letting this car make me late for work, and nothing happened. The car drove away. I kind of dismissed it as me being overly concerned, but later I told my mom about what happened, laughing, and she was horrified. She told me I never should have got so close to the car, should have crossed the road. Anyway, I haven't seen that car stopping before or since that morning, which is weird, as whenever I see a car stopping at that hour, it tends to begin doing that every morning, as a routine. I'd say maybe the driver was Googling directions, but I couldn't see a light on a phone in there, and like I said, I couldn't hear any talking for it to be a phone call. I'm still not worrying about it much, if I'm honest, but my mom is still terrified. My lack of concern may or may not be related to me being incredibly depressed. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.